So let's welcome Hasan, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Cool.
Okay, great. So, I actually prepared some questions to actually go through with, but I thought that, we know each other quite well, and, let's see what the audience actually has to say as well. But maybe you could start with giving us an overview about how did you get into entrepreneurship, your background, and a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Sure. So how did I get into entrepreneurship? Is the volume on okay and stuff? Or, yeah, cool. I was working in an investment bank like most people here in Bahrain, and that was my life, trading shares and going into the bank, working day in, day out. I realized that, I think I can do better if I do something for myself, and I'm not honestly enjoying this, so let me do something that I will enjoy. And so I started Film to Go, which was an online DVD rental business in 2008. I forget the dates now. 2008, and then went from there. Complained, like you said, about there not being any funding and capital, and in about 2010, we ended up setting up Timur, which is one of the first angel investment groups in Bahrain. From there, we saw there was a gap in the whole region. Started working towards, how can you fill the gap regionally, not just in Bahrain, and then started working with 500 startups in about 2014. And last year, we launched a fund as part of 500 full-time to be investing in seed-stage startups across the Middle East and North Africa. So that's a very abridged version of my life over the last 10 years or so.
I remember when we first met, I think it was back in 2010 when you were actually frustrated with your first startup. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit more about the sort of the challenges you faced when you were starting up, and how I think a lot of the people maybe in the audience here who are starting up are a lot luckier than you were.
So the main challenge I faced was the availability of funding. So although the Bahrain Development Bank was there with debt funding, most startups aren't actually cash flow positive, and so can't really use debt financing in order to grow and develop and build their businesses up. And so I needed to find equity funding. And in the region at the time, no one really knew what I was talking about. Like, I was reading articles about venture capital, about angel investment, and then I'd come here and I'd talk to different members of the business community, and they'd be like, what are you talking about? You don't have any profits. How can we invest in this business? How much have you put in? Like, we'll value it according to the cash that you've put in, and all these sort of different measures. And it was honestly quite frustrating because I had to go back to basics and try and educate people on what it meant to raise funding and equity financing as a startup. And that was very interesting as an experience. Very frustrating, but interesting. What it led to me reading and learning and understanding better what it was I was talking about. So when I'd go into these meetings, I'd be better prepared with, success stories of angel investment, like, Google's first angel investor did 1,000 times return on his investment at IPO. Things like comparable multiples. I was raising for a startup that was similar to Netflix, and Netflix at the time was worth about $4 or $5 billion. It's worth a lot more now, but at the time it was worth about $4 billion. And it was all these conversations just talking about the value of the business, the value of growth, not just the value of the cash that's been put in. And it was an education process for everyone involved.
Yeah, I think I can still probably say that maybe there's still challenges here in the market when people want to when we talk about valuations, because we also have the other side, and maybe we can get into this a little bit later, about how some startups maybe overvalue their startups. But let's go back to your situation of raising funding, and then were you able to convince people to put money into Tenmo? Bahrain Development Bank also was one of the investors, so that must have been a struggle as well. And how were you able to change that mindset?
So it was, what I really needed was a champion. And thankfully we found one. Sami Jalal, who's the current chairman and one of the founders of Tenmu, he believed in the whole concept. He took me under his wing and started to really understand what angel investment was. And he's like, well, I want to give this opportunity to young Bahrainis to get started. And then he went out, championed the concept to the rest of the business community. And we managed to raise money from his network, as well as some of the people that I knew through my existing sort of contacts and relationships. It was hard. It took us about 18 months to raise the capital that became Tenmu. We had commitments that dropped out. We had people that had told us that they were going to give us money and then just disappeared. That's a common story, I guess, in Bahrain for a lot of entrepreneurs, but that happened to us as a firm level as well. And we had to go in and try and educate people again about how, yes, we were going to put in all the money for the founders, but we were only going to be taking a minority share because it's the founders that are going to build this business. And so for them to be incentivized, they need to own the majority of the business. And so it was quite a tough thing to do, but in the end, we managed to raise about 1 million dinars, and that's lasted Tenmu until now, and we've still been investing. We've done 23 investments Tenmu to date, and we've generated a return on investment quite significant, a multiple of what we put in. So that's actually been pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty good for us too, since we actually you convinced BDB to actually put their money into that. Just a little bit about. Maybe I think what was it? Maybe halfway into like 5 years ago or so, when you actually got the attention of 500 startups, if I'm not incorrect. And so Bahrain is like, considered maybe non-existent to maybe, one of the top, venture capital funds in Silicon Valley. So how were you able to get their attention? And at the beginning, actually, try to support Tenmu in the initial stage, like, doing investment with Tenmu.
Yeah. That was an interesting situation there. So there was, at some point in time, we were seeing a lot of deal flow as Tenmu from around the region. As Tenmu, our mandate was to invest in idea stage in Bahrain, but we were seeing some really good deals. And actually some of the stuff that we saw, there was one deal that I saw at a $3 million valuation, now is at a $300 million valuation. So I wanted to take advantage of that somehow, because there wasn't really anyone that was investing at this time period. It's a long story, but there was an entity in Bahrain that was going to commit to a VC fund at the time that Tenmu was going to run to invest across the region based on this deal flow that we had. And then I went because I wanted to balance out the risk, and I wanted to have Silicon Valley exposure as well as MENA exposure to sort of make sure that we understood the two markets quite well. Went to Silicon Valley, and it was the most interesting and eye-opening experience of my life. No one cared about the Middle East. Like at all. They just didn't care. I'd go into meetings where on the firm's website they'd say, we're a global venture capital firm. You go into the meeting, one of the partners in one of the firms actually pulled up Google Maps and says, can you point on the map to where you're talking about in the world? So that was the level of ignorance and non-understanding of what was happening there. But thankfully, 500 Startups was a different story. 500 Startups had actually, by the time I went to them, already done 2 or 3 investments in the Middle East. One of the founders, Dave McClure, had been to the Middle East 2 or 3 times. And so they already had an affinity, and they had been actively investing globally. They'd invested in India, China. Middle East was one of the markets that was on their radar. And so the way I got that connection was a friend of a friend of a friend, finally, and then I got to have the meeting with 500 Startups. And then there I invited them to come to Bahrain. I invited Dave to come to Bahrain, and he actually took me up on the offer, and he came to this event that we do, that Tenmu does every year, called the Mena Angel Investor Summit. He came, he keynoted that. There were like 40 startups from all across the MENA region presenting. I think at the time he decided to do 1 or 2 investments into startups there, right from the event directly. And then that's how the relationship got kicked off. And then when the fund failed and the firm that had committed to be our seed investor backed out, they reached out again. They're like, look, we want to do more in the Middle East. How can we work together? And so there's a lot of ups and downs in that story, and a lot of depression, and a lot of positive times, and a lot more depression. I think it was mostly depression. But that was sort of how we got 500 startups to pay attention to Bahrain. And managed to negotiate a pretty decent deal where we would be their scouts, we'd look for deal flow here, we'd help them on the ground in the Middle East, and then eventually that morphed into me leading the Middle East and North Africa Fund.
Yeah, no, that's quite an impressive sort of journey because, I mean, I think that sometimes it's hard to get people to actually even believe that, the startups here actually have anything to sort of offer on a global scale. Maybe going back to that whole question of how startups here can actually be attractive to funds in Silicon Valley. I mean, at the end of the day, I think you might, sometimes feel like, there is that, inner, feeling that, you're from the region, you want it to be on that scale. But what are your views on the startups here? And you probably get like hundreds of applications, people coming up to you, throwing out ideas. How can you know that this startup is something that can actually be able to compete with the other portfolio companies that you have on your global funds?
So I try not to compare the regional startups to the global companies. I think the closest comparable we have as the Middle East is actually what's happened in Southeast Asia. We're probably 2 or 3 years behind them. So anytime I go to Singapore or Malaysia, it's like going into the future. And then I come back, I'm like, okay, that's what's going to happen in 2 years. Good to know. And it's been pretty accurate so far. So how do I decide what to invest in? And we see a bit more than 100. Like last year, we saw about 1,500 deals. We ended up investing in 50 here in the region alone. 500 startups globally sees probably 10, 20,000 deals a year. And invest in a couple of hundred. So it's pretty straightforward. One is we don't invest in ideas. Like ideas are essentially worthless to us and most investors. So if you've got an idea, don't really waste your time going to talk to professional investors. Probably try to raise from, maybe accelerators, incubators, entities that provide grants to startups at that stage. Maybe friends and family, people that know you and trust you. That might be the better way to raise rather than going to venture capitalists. Us as a VC, what we want to invest in is a product that's been launched that has some product market fit, an indication of traction. So that's some user base and that's growing. More often we're looking for revenues. That means that people are willing to pay for what you're doing. And so that's sort of our first filter and criteria. So have you been able to execute something, and are people willing to use it and pay for it? And if that's the case, then yes, we'll look at it more seriously. Then we start going into more filters, whereas we look at the team. We're looking more at, can this team work together and execute well? And do they have the necessary requirements? So is it a balanced team with a marketing person plus a technical person plus maybe a business person as well? Or is it just a couple of consultants that have everything outsourced? We've seen that a lot, and we don't invest in those typically. And so it's the team, it's the traction, the numbers, the figures. And then we look at the market and competition. If there's 100 other people that are doing exactly the same thing as you're trying to do, and they're already ahead, they've already raised, and there's nothing really differentiating you, then there's really no point. Like, you're going into a very difficult market, and just in terms of convincing investors that you're doing something unique, it'll be hard. And then trying to raise because other people have already raised. We've done a couple of investments where their competitors have already raised from most of the other VCs. And so when they're trying to fundraise now, there's no one that will invest with them because they've already invested in their competitors. Like, there's conflict of interest issues that arise. And so you need to be very cautious of where you are. So understand the market, understand the competition of what you're going after. And then, we look at, I guess, what you were talking about before, which is the terms and the valuation of the deal. That annoys me more than anything else when startups come up to me and have nothing and are like, we're valued at $10 million. I'm like, based on what? And they'll come up with pretty extravagant reasons to justify that, and usually the word Silicon Valley company that's raised the same as us or doing the same as us comes into that conversation, which I usually ignore. So, these are the things we're looking for. So we don't look at, how can this be a Silicon Valley competing sort of business. We're looking at how can this grow into something that the region needs and the region will be able to succeed in. And you've seen successes based on that. So Souk.com was Amazon.com for the Middle East. Careem is Uber for the Middle East. So, like, you don't need to be competitive on a world stage. You just need to make sure you're competitive and dominant on at least a regional basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that whole maybe moving away from comparing ourselves to Silicon Valley at the moment is probably too much of a large step, and we'll probably always feel like we're way behind on that element. But I mean, you've been investing for at least 10 years, and obviously have a track record. And not all of the investments have been successful, but I mean, maybe this is like, maybe we can like look at how, startups are supposed to react to this and how you would feel. But when something goes wrong, how can a VC make it better for the startup, and how can the startup actually make it easy when it comes to like either liquidating the company, or when a VC thinks, and especially when it comes on to value creation or finding the better way of, let's say they want to change a founder, or they want to build up a new team, how do you handle that? And then what would your advice be to the startup when they're in that kind of situation?
We don't get involved into those situations. We've had some, as part of Tenmo, we had some difficult situations where as board members we had to get involved, but honestly as 500 we hate that stuff. The way we like to tell our startups are, look, we're an all-you-can-eat buffet. Come and take whatever you need. There's all this advice, all this mentorship and everything available to you. If you don't benefit from it, you don't want to take it, fine, up to you, we've invested, and let's see how that goes. But we like the founders that continually ask for support, ask for help, ask for advice. That's usually a good sign. When founders take our investment and go quiet is usually a very bad sign. And so, it's we don't get into these conversations where we're trying to replace the founders. It's just too much of a headache. If at the seed stage where we operate, it's already getting down that story, there's almost never any coming back from that. At the Series A and Series B, after a startup has raised a couple of $1 million, then yes, of course, you can resolve all of these things. But at the seed stage, there's only a team of like 3 or 4 people, and if already the founders are fighting, then it's hard to come from that. And so, as founders, you shouldn't expect the VCs to step in. And as VCs, we shouldn't really be that involved at that stage, at the seed stage with you guys. We don't take board seats. We don't want any of that hassle or headache, which is unique for the region. Everyone wants a board seat. I want to control what's going on, but it doesn't matter. Like, out of our investments, 80% will go to zero and won't be worth anything. So why bother? I know that's tough to hear and say, but like, why? Like, it's very difficult for you as a startup to go from something that's having a lot of trouble to being one of the great success stories. Whereas if something's doing okay, it's much easier for our mentorship to bump you up to a great success story. So that's a hard truth that I've unfortunately come to realize a very hard way to do that. Yeah.
I mean, I think that that actually does make sense. I think that a lot of times, we through our program sometimes look at companies coming together, and if already at the early stages they're facing issues, it'll be very hard for them to agree on anything. So let alone if they have investors at that stage. Let's talk a little bit about the way in Bahrain we incorporate companies and things like that. So it's not probably as easy if they were done sort of on another jurisdiction. But let's say how would you advise startups when they're actually raising funding? So let's say they got their friends or family, they have that person who trusted in them, and then they needed to get, let's say, a check from 500 Startup or another VC.
Yeah.
What would your advice be when, especially, a lot of times people get wary about, but my money is not going to be here. They're telling me to put it on a Cayman Island or a BVI.
Yeah.
So why do VCs prefer that? I mean, maybe this is a simple question, but just,
Because there's a lot more protection provided to us as investors in those jurisdictions than there is here in Bahrain. And it's a lot easier to do a lot of things that you need to do. So the things that are missing, not just in Bahrain but across the region, is we don't have a concept of preference shares. So most VCs will want preference shares. So, the Series A preferred shares, Series B preferred shares. So each round will want different preferences, different liquidity preferences, different information rights, different, drag along, tag along, whatever rights there are. And each stage will want those different sort of things attached to their shares. We don't have that in Bahrain. The other thing is our preferred method of investing is using convertible notes. And those aren't really accepted here in Bahrain. Convertible notes are basically a quick, cheap, and easy way for us to make an investment without having to go through the whole process of, shareholders agreements, share subscription agreement, paying thousands of dollars of legal fees just to get us in, if we were doing a $50,000 investment. If we went through the equity route, like we would have to in Bahrain and other markets, it would cost us easily like $10,000 to $20,000 in legal fees. When we invest through convertible note in BVI or Cayman or Delaware, we can get it done in 24 hours for like $500 in legal fees. And so there's definite benefits to us doing that. And also, like, those markets have much more established laws and regulations and case studies in their legal system related to startup investment, companies getting liquidated if their founders fall out, employee share option pools, vesting agreements between the founders, all these sort of legal protections that us as VCs would want, we can't really do here. So we have a case right now where there's a startup that local investors have invested in, and we've told them to reincorporate it into a BVI holding company, and that company would then hold the Bahraini entity. And the local investors it's been a bit difficult to get that done. But I think most VCs will want that. So if you've raised your initial round, you're trying to raise from institutional investors, venture capitalists, or whatever, prepare yourself for that. So either already just go through the whole process of setting up your holding company, having that own your operating company, the structures. I'm not giving legal advice in case my lawyers want me. Like, I'm not giving legal advice, but generally, we as VCs like BVI, Cayman Island, Delaware, ADGM starting to emerge as an entity as well that is comfortable to some of the VCs in the region. So, I would recommend you do that. I would recommend you put in place vesting agreements for the founders, because there will be falling outs, and you need to be very clear about who owns what when that happens. I would make sure you have an employee share option pool program set up and in place before you raise. Or you could do it while you're raising, so it's not that important. But vesting agreement, definitely for sure, between the founders. And yeah, just set up everything correctly.
Yeah. You used to be on one side of the fence, and now you're saying about all of the things that you look at. But, a lot of the startups will come to say, you know what, nobody wants to give us money, and there's money, but people don't want to give it to us. And he spoke about, okay, people, if they are at the idea stage, they don't want, you're not going to even look at them. But what does somebody need to have in place before coming to even approach, a VC that invests at a seed stage like yourselves?
Really just show us that you're able to execute and there are customers willing to use or pay for your product. That's pretty much it. Like, if you're coming to us and it's an idea, then forget it. Like, obviously no one's going to invest. I get 10 ideas every morning before I brush my teeth. It means nothing. Execution is everything. And so show us that you can execute, and then you can raise money from investors. And the other thing that I see quite often here is, you're trying to copy someone that's already in the market. There's no real competitive advantage that you have. You haven't been able to show any traction. Obviously, no one's going to invest in you. It's very difficult for them to justify it when there's a more successful other, big brother that exists in the market. So, be a bit unique and show that you're able to execute before you try and raise money from sophisticated investors. From friends and family, go ahead. If they're willing to take the risk on you, then by all means. But yeah, and it's not that expensive anymore. So I see startups that come to me and they're like, I have this idea, but I need $500,000 just to develop the app and launch it. And it's stupid. No, you don't. Honestly, it should not cost anything to launch. If you are setting up an app The technology is one of the most important things that you have. And if you are trying to outsource that technology, and then some people try to outsource the technology and then outsource the marketing and customer acquisition. So what are you actually doing? Like, what am I investing in? Nothing. Like, what's the point? So don't do that. If you are setting up a tech company and you're not a technical person, find a technical co-founder to work with you, or a CTO that's like a C-level sort of employee with you. That's almost a partner, and who can work on the technology. It might not even cost you anything, because like most MVPs now can be done within a month and on AWS with like credits that you can get. It'll cost you almost nothing in hosting as well. So if you ever come to a founder or someone who knows what they're doing, you say, in order for me to launch, I need $500,000, it's wrong. That's not the right thing to be doing. I
mean, it's interesting that you bring that up, because sometimes at work we always have these arguments, because people will come and they say, well, we need to pay about $10,000 or $12,000 for X person to actually develop it, and then we're going to manage it after. And I said, but what are you expecting the investor to actually invest in? They could just go to the developer and have it done. And where's that unique technology? And you just heard it from the mouth of the VCs, so that just doesn't work. So you can't get mad even at us or anyone giving you that kind of advice, because at the end of the day, you need to have that kind of unique IP or even execution.
Execution. Yeah. If you're outsourcing your development and you're outsourcing your marketing and your customer acquisition, then how are you going to execute on anything? And all these development agencies, they are horrible. They charge you an arm and a leg. They'll build something for you. It'll never be up to date. You'll have to keep paying them to update everything. Your technology is your basis of your entire business. You should be working on that day in, day out. And especially if you're going to try and implement things like some small growth hacks, experimentation, anything that you need to do, you won't be able to do it if your technology is outsourced. So just don't do that.
So Hasan, like you said, you get over 1,000, or is it 10,000? What did you say?
In the MENA region, we saw about 1,000.
Yeah. So, or even others that you've seen before the MENA region fund actually started. Would you ever say that you've been in situations where you said, "Oh, wait, I should have put my money in there"? That have you so far been lucky enough to make the right decisions?
No, I definitely have regrets. But there are regrets that are understandable. Like, I didn't have the money to invest, and so obviously I missed out on a few deals. But I think now that we're actively investing, I don't think there's been anything that since we've started investing till now that I feel like, damn, I wish I'd gotten into that deal. I don't think that's been that big an issue. It sucked like a year while we were fundraising the fund and we didn't have money to invest. I did miss out on a couple of deals then. But there's other deals like Kareem. I saw Kareem at a $6 million valuation. I didn't invest. One, I didn't have the money to invest. And two, at that time, it did not look anything like what it is now. It was basically, you send an email to Kareem and they'll set up a car for you at the airport, waiting for you at the airport. And that was basically it. It wasn't what it is now. But I don't regret missing that one. I just, it's fine.
Yeah. So, you spoke about a little bit, you touched on how when startups are trying to choose investors, sometimes we get, some of the startups coming in saying, we're not sure, we're a bit worried, we don't know if this is the right person. And sometimes people, like you said, don't have the extra cash to invest in all these legal fees just to review these documents, which can be a little bit expensive here in the region, especially if you want the better ones. What would your advice be when they have, let's say, two almost similar term sheets? Why would they choose one investor over the other?
If they're almost similar, then find the one that you feel most comfortable with. The one who you feel will give you the most value. And even if they're not almost similar, even if one gives you a higher valuation, but the other one seems like a better investor, forget about the valuation number, because that's a very short-term play. You should be focused on where the value add is going to be. And so you shouldn't be looking at that number. You should be looking at, is this a good investor? Will they be able to help me with the next round? will they be able to give me the advice that I need to grow, and will I be comfortable with them going forward? So I've seen a lot of founders where they've gone for bad investors just because the valuation they got was higher, and then have regretted it 6 to 9 months later, and then the business fails. So don't do that.
I mean, when you talked about, giving right advice, so you're talking about mentorship a lot. What are your views on that, and how important do you think it is? And in your capacity, I'm sure you mentor, but how often do you mentor?
So I've realized something is that I have certain areas of expertise, but there's certain areas of expertise that the founders need that I don't have. And that's one of the other reasons why I don't like taking board seats, is because I know some stuff, but there's stuff that the founders need that I don't have. So why should one person sit on the board? Why shouldn't there be a team supporting the company? And so there's things like recruitment to build out a team, growth hacking and customer acquisition online, building out PR and communication stuff, where I have some understanding, but I don't have the in-depth detail that I can actually support the startups as much as possible. And so what we've done is we, as 500, have a couple of things. One is, as the Mena team, we're building out these areas of expertise within our team. So there's someone that will be able to help and support the founders on those areas of that specific advice. And then as 500 Startups broadly, we have a couple of different things. We have a network of about 300 mentors that provide their time and advice using our online system. You can book office hours. Any founders from our portfolio anywhere in the world can book office hours with these mentors globally. And that helps quite a lot. And mentorship, here in the region, there's a lot of people that call themselves mentors, which they have no business being called mentors. They've never had a startup themselves. They've never raised any money. They've never really done anything, but all of a sudden they're entrepreneurship experts and they're mentors. But don't listen to them. Find out if someone really has done something before they start giving you advice and before you start following that advice. So I can give advice because I've done all the wrong things, and I can tell you what not to do. Because I had my business and I failed miserably, and I can tell you everything that went wrong. And I've learned a lot as well about, one of the superpowers that 500 Startups has is related to online growth hacking, customer acquisition, and distribution. So I've learned a lot around that front as well. But yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in recruitment. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in PR and communications. But there's some people that pretend to be experts in everything, and so just avoid those people.
Okay. Well, I mean, would you say that right now in the region the market is on the side of the VCs? It's a VC market, or is it on the side of these startups?
So there still isn't that much funding available in the region for startups, at least in the seed stage, and probably at Series B and C as well. So it still very much is a VC game, except if the founder really has something interesting. If they've been able to prove they're able to execute, they've been able to grow 30-40% every month, they've been able to show a customer base, they've been able to really demonstrate that there's something interesting there, then I've started to see some deals get competitive with other VCs coming in and pitch, and usually that's around the Series A stage. There's a lot of investors at Series A. Seed is still very much an investor's market, so and the hardest thing about raising money at the seed stage, and a lot of the stages, is finding someone to actually set the terms for the round and be the lead. There's a lot of people that want to invest, they want to jump in, but they still don't have the confidence in their abilities to really set valuations, set terms, and all these sort of things. And so they always want the comfort of someone else setting the terms, leading the round. And so we, as 500, typically don't do this globally, but in the region we've been forced to. About half of the deals that we've invested are ones where we've set the terms, and other investors have then followed us in. And so that's sort of, it's still an investor's market. As a founder, there's 10 other people doing exactly the same thing as you are. Unless you really have shown numbers and growth, then there's really nothing that you can do or say to really convince investors that you're investable.
And then how do we avoid the trap of giving overinflated valuations? What would your advice be on when startups are trying to present their valuations?
I just ignore them. So if a startup comes to me with whatever valuation, typically I already know what the market valuation is, and I'll sort of benchmark and peg them around that sort of level. All right, you've got $10,000 in monthly revenue, or you've got $20,000 in revenue. All right, comparable startups growing at 20% per month are maybe valued at $1 or $2 million, then that's sort of where I'm going to benchmark around. If you come to me and you're like asking for a $20 million valuation, at that stage, I'm just going to say thank you very much, but no thank you. There are still investors that are not as sophisticated, which will take those terms, but you are shooting yourself in the foot as a founder by doing that, because your next round is going to be a down round, because you're not going to achieve the metrics and KPIs that you need in order to raise the next round of financing. And if you're not able to do that, no other investors will come in. You end up with two options. One is you raise at the valuation that's reasonable for that terms, or you die because no one's going to invest at those terms that you had raised before. So pretty straightforward option. So for me, rather than you as a founder going through that and then 12 to 18 months later realizing that your valuation is too high, and then facing this life or death situation where you're in an even a worse situation to negotiate than you would be normally, don't do it. Like, find out what the relative metrics are in the market. There's data sources like Magnet and others that are sort of being more active in terms of valuation and numbers and what's happening. And most investors know what they're doing. That's not true. A lot of investors don't know what they're doing. But a lot of people tend to know what they're doing. So typically if an investor tells you that your valuation's too high, this is sort of the range, then readjust. Don't be too hard-headed, and don't just do that, but because it's not in your interest as well. Most Series A deals in the region are happening at maybe valuations between $6 to $10 million. So if you're coming at the seed stage and asking for $10 million valuation, you're essentially you're lining yourself up for a down round in the future. So be aware of this stuff. Don't be greedy right at the beginning, because in 12 to 18 months, it's not going to end well.
So it's safe to say that people need to be realistic, because people are going to sort of uncover the fact. I mean, people are aware of the benchmarks and information is a little bit available. Yeah. Because even if they were, if you think that you're like a winner because you have like a top valuation, the next time you actually need funding, it's just not going to work out.
Yeah, you might not raise anything, and then you're dead. So that valuation lasted you 12 months, and now you're at zero. So. VCs tend to, be accused at the fact that, they're sharks, their ethics or their integrity is always on the borderline. They're always trying to steal money and, suck out all the energy from the startups. How true is that? I mean, it's not actually true. There are some bad VCs. But the majority of VCs realize that the value in the business is the founders and the continued growth and support of the founders. And so you quickly figure out after a couple of conversations whether a VC is in that camp or the others. But the majority of VCs in the region are actually pretty helpful and supportive, and they want to see you succeed because your success means their success. Taking value and all that sort of stuff, like at the seed stage, there's nothing to take. What am I going to do? Like, take the laptop that you've been using for 10 years? Like, there's nothing there. And so, yeah, forget about all of that. Don't worry too much about those things. It's unnecessary worry at this stage. When you get to Series B as well, there's not that many funds. You might start going into private equity territory, and then they have their own set of things that they do. And, it's just navigating the waters. But generally, VCs are not bad, and VCs are not evil. They're trying to invest, and obviously they will negotiate to make sure that their investment is protected. But at the end of the day, they will want to, as soon as they make an investment, they're there to make sure you succeed.
That makes sense. And then when it comes to when you were saying there are two, the success of the startup is your success. So who does, everyone thinks that, okay, these VCs don't have anyone to answer to, they're making the decisions and that's it. So who do you have to answer to? Like when you succeed, how does that help you?
So basically, our money isn't our money. We're poor as VCs. Some of us have lower salaries than some of the founders that we've invested in. So just take that into account. VCs run, just like you as founders raise money from VCs raise money from investors, LPs, limited partners. And in the region, there's not that many of them as a whole. And so I report to my limited partners, which are our investors, into how the performance of the fund has gone. So everyone has someone that they report to. And the limited partners, then usually they're part of an institution, and then they have to report how their performance has been for the investments that they've made. And then that institution will have to report to a government agency or a board of directors. So there's always like someone higher up the food chain than you. So we always have someone to report to. So
it's not just if Hasan says no, it's not just because he wants to say no, maybe it is, but he also has to make sure that his decisions reflect the interest overall of the people above him. So that's why I always try to tell people it's not just about you and the startup. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So Hasan, you're quite busy, so you just got off the flight from Riyadh to join us here. You need to, you help out startups, you mentor them, you give them advice, you're always available, and you're covering the whole entire MENA region. What do we always talk about work-life balance. How are you able to manage that? You have a family, but you have your startups, and you have your VC that you need to, and the LPs that you need to answer to. So what would your advice be about conducting that work-life balance?
Oh, I have no idea. I haven't figured that out yet. It's not very balanced right now. I'm traveling 3 to 4 days a week just around the region because I'm looking at deals, investing in startups, raising money from investors. And so, I don't have the best advice to give on that front.
Okay. Just before we open up the floor for questions, so maybe Badua, you can just make sure that we have a microphone ready for the questions. What would be, just sort of like your advice, final words to the audience before we let them ask questions?
I don't know, just basically make sure you understand what you're doing when you're going to talk to investors. And really, there's a lot of resources online. There's a lot of things to read. Make sure you've read them. Make sure you're approaching people in the right way and the right people at the right stage, so that you don't waste their time and you don't waste your time as well. So
great.
Generally, that's it.
Questions? We have one here at the front. Just make sure you just introduce yourself and speak into the microphone so we can get it on the live stream.
My question's from me, Samir. Thank you. Thanks for the talk. My question's in regards to both sides of the fence that you're talking about. So the first bit is that how do you deal with investors, you being the entrepreneur, that just cannot remove this idea from their head that they need complete dominance, whether equity dominance or multiple board seats, etc.? And the second question is, do you think it would be more helpful for investors that want to invest in Tenmo or whatever if you share current valuations of your portfolio?
So when it comes to dealing with difficult investors that don't understand the mindset of venture capital and stuff, it's hard in the region. There's people that have a lot of wealth but haven't really done venture capital before, and so they think of it in a traditional sort of manner of, I need control of the board, I'm putting all the money in. That's not healthy because the valuation of that startup will stagnate. The founders don't have an incentive to continue to grow, and it's not in the best interest of the investor to be doing that. I would probably find other investors, but that's not as easy as it sounds. Or I would try and find someone from a background that's more venture capital or understands that, to talk to the existing investors when you're raising your next round, because we've been able to do that in the past. As 500 startups, we've been able to talk to investors that have that background and say, look, here is what's going to happen. If you continue doing this, you're not going to be able to raise any money. The founder's going to quit, and whatever you've invested is going to be worthless. So here's how things are done if you want to continue growing the business and things like that. And generally, we've been successful at that because we're coming in with an investment. We sort of know what we're doing, and so that helps a little bit. So try and find someone to come in who has that mindset to talk to the existing investors.
Right. So my question was that if you're the entrepreneur rather than the VC talking to an investor, so you're an entrepreneur raising funds, you have investors on the other side of the fence who are saying, okay, I'm going to put $1 in for a $10 valuation, so basically I want 10% of the company or more, I'm bringing the money, I need multiple board seats. As an entrepreneur, how do you respond to that?
Sometimes you don't have a choice. There's not that much funding available, so you got to be careful. So rule of thumb is at each stage of your fundraising as a founder, you shouldn't be diluting yourself more than 20%. So as long as it falls within that, it's like, okay, is this investor giving me enough money to get to my next set of KPIs to raise the next round of financing? Is the money I'm raising going to get me 12 to 18 months of life, and in that 12 to 18 months, will I be able to raise the next round of financing? So it was like, idea stage, will it get me to seed? If it's seed, will it get me to Series A? And then you look at your dilution, is my dilution more than 20 or 30% this round? If it is, then maybe it's not a good deal, but if it's around 20 or 30%, it's fine. So these are the things that you need to take into account as a founder. So board seats sort of sucks at the seed stage. It's stupid to take board seats, but some people like them, and as long as the control is sort of balanced, then you'll be okay. We've seen board seats in seed stage where it's 5 board members, 2 founders, 1 independent, 2 investors. It's okay. The next round, when you raise your Series A, there'll be other investors that'll come in. The whole board will change, and everything's going to be different anyway. So each round, the new investors coming in will renegotiate whatever has already been done.
Okay, and then the other question was regarding the current value of portfolios. Like, do you share that when you're raising capital for your fund? Do you?
As 500 startups, we have a data room, and we provide all the data about the companies you've invested in. We've done in the region almost 100 investments now. So yeah, that's provided to potential investors.
Great. Next question. We have one at the back.
Thanks for your time, Hasan. A couple of questions. One is, at a seed stage, founders are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to legal knowledge and sophistication. How do we address that as an ecosystem issue? And the second one is, as a venture capitalist, what are the signs that you look for in a founder or a company in order for you to re-up in successive rounds? And conversely, what are the signs that you look for to say, I'm pulling the plug, that's enough?
Okay. About legal stuff, at the seed stage, you don't need to worry too much about things related to shareholders agreements, subscription agreement, and all that sort of stuff, because what you'll need to raise is maybe on convertible notes. 500 startups, we have our own template for convertible notes that are online. You can download it, put your company name, and everything should be okay as is. But if you're raising a couple $100,000, then you should spend $10,000 getting real legal advice. But the only way as an ecosystem to really work on that is to try and standardize templates and standardize processes. And that's what we've done with the documentation that we have. And it's something that's pretty easy to do. We just as an ecosystem need to figure out and say, okay, for seed stage investments, these are the documentation, these are the documents that we can use.
But if someone's not dealing with 500...
Sorry, do you mind if you just...
Yeah, even if you're not dealing with us, our documents are online, so you can download it and use it for anything. And a lot of deals we go into, and we're like, wait, you're already using our documents? So it's fine. What was the second question?
What are the signs that you look for as a venture capitalist to re-up in successive funding rounds in a founder or a company? And conversely, if you want to pull the plug, what are the signs that you look for?
So 2 things. One is, has the founder been communicating with us regularly? So at a minimum, once someone has made an investment, you need to at least tell them on a quarterly basis what's been happening in your business. But at the seed stage, when you're still getting started and there's a lot happening every month, keep your investors updated on a monthly basis. Simple update, just your KPIs, key things that have happened in that month, and just send that out regularly. The more I see from you, the more comfortable I am in the fact that you are actually doing something. If you disappear, if I make an investment and you disappear for 12 months and then come back and ask me for money again, I'm like, what have you been doing for 12 months? And then you have to tell me. And it's not going to be a great conversation, because why have you not been telling me what's been happening? And now all of a sudden you need cash, and I'm not going to give you that. So anyway, that's sort of the thing. It's like, if you raise money from investors, make sure they are aware of what's happening in your business. So as a fund, I update my investors every 6 weeks about what's been happening. So I expect, at least on a monthly basis, the investments that I make to tell me what's been happening with them. I probably won't respond. I'll skim through, and if there's any major issues, I'll email back and be like, hey, I can help you with this, or hey, what's going on here? But at the end of the day, when I see that hit my inbox on a monthly basis regularly, it shows that actually, yes, you care, you're a good investment, there's something happening positively here. So that's like the qualitative side of things. The quantitative side of things, have you been growing, and how's your performance been? So if you've been growing since I make the investment 20-30% every month regularly, your performance has been great, you're generating numbers, your revenues are good, you have good unit economics, then we'll probably invest again. And so it's both of those factors. So even if a startup's been doing amazingly but hasn't been really communicating with us, it gives us a question mark. Like, are these real numbers? So that's sort of it. Communicate and do well, and you'll get more money.
So would you say, Hasan, that 20 to 30% would be even, reasonable for here in the region in terms of growth?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That should be your target that you should set yourself as a founder, is at the seed stage. Try and hit 50% month-over-month growth. You won't hit it, but you'll try. You'll end up with 20 or 30%, which is great.
Over here at the front. Here and then in the front.
Hi, Hasan.
Hi.
Could you, in your opinion...
If you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Adam. In your opinion, could you highlight some of the key challenges entrepreneurs face in the MENA region in terms of infrastructure or human resources or whatever?
So human resources, everyone's like, oh, there's no talent in the Middle East. Well, everyone complains about that. I was in Malaysia, they're complaining about that. I was in Korea, they're complaining about that. I was in Silicon Valley, they're complaining that there's not enough human resources and talent. So it doesn't matter, I think. So yes, there is that issue, but it's the same issue everywhere. But there are pools of talent in the region. They're still untapped and pretty reasonable. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi actually is emerging as well. There are talent pools here, so you just need to make sure you tap into them. But yeah, I tend to ignore that one, because everyone who complains about that, everywhere in the world are complaining about that. Challenges other than that, basically, is lack of availability of funding. There's not that many people that are investing actively in the region. There's probably 10 or 20 VC funds that are actually professionally doing it. There's probably another 20 or 30 angel investors that are doing it on a regular basis, and then there's a couple of corporates that are doing one-off investments here and there. But really, we need 10 times the number of funds than we already do have in the region to make sure that we reach a decent level where China or Europe is, in terms of a multiple of GDP invested into venture capital. So yeah, funding is an issue that I think is still there. It's not as much of an issue at Series A. It's more of an issue at Series B now. Seed is also becoming an issue. So, it depends. Other obstacles are the legal system, of course. But, if you're an entrepreneur, figure the way out of that. Like, Uber wasn't legal for a while. I'm not saying do the same stuff that Uber did, but just don't let that stuff stop you from actually doing what you need to do. And it's all a mindset thing, right? You'll find these founders that will always just be complaining about what they can't do, what the problems are. They'll just complain, and won't ever do anything, either to fix it or to go around it or whatever. And so they just get stuck. They'll never raise funding. They'll never do anything. So don't do that. If there's an obstacle, find a way around it or find a way over it and keep doing. That's what we as investors are looking for in founders that are able to execute and surpass these challenges. So yeah, there's loads of challenges, but there's loads of challenges everywhere. Just don't let that stop you.
Yeah, great. Over here in the front.
Hi, my name is Ali. I'm with the Bahrain Development Bank. So my question is, seems that a lot of the rhetoric on entrepreneurship applies best on technology-based startups. For example, the ease of starting a business, the low cost of building the app. But what about, maybe hardware development or something related towards energy or manufacturing? To what extent would you say that starting off is easy and getting financing or investment is easy? I mean, are there options for those guys?
It's not easy even for tech startups. Getting financing is hard for no matter what. But you're right. Those are more capital intensive things. So things like hardware, things like biotech, things like manufacturing. Those are much more capital intensive sort of things. It'll cost you more to get started for sure, but there are still ways to minimize that as well. So for instance, if it's a hardware startup, you can actually get your prototype funded through things like Kickstarter and crowdfunding campaigns where you pre-sell before you've actually produced them and then start working on producing. So that's a way to minimize the risk. So for us, we do invest in hardware startups as well, but we wait to make sure that, one, they're able to manufacture the first batch, because there are a lot of obstacles to get there. If you're manufacturing in China, unless one of the founders actually moves there and lives in the factory to make sure it gets done, you're probably not going to see the light of day for your product. And then the other part of it is, are people willing to pay and buy it? And so you solve both those issues by putting it on Indiegogo or Kickstarter and pre-selling whatever you have. And so there's ways to overcome these sort of obstacles for things like hardware startups. But you're right, it is a more capital intensive thing. It takes much longer to do. And it's a different breed of investors that will be investing in that.
Have you seen examples from the Mena region using Kickstarter?
Yeah, so we invested in a startup called...
Sorry, can you just repeat that for the live stream?
Yeah, I was just curious whether you've seen examples of hardware-based startups that launched a business through Indiegogo or Kickstarter.
Yeah, so we invested in a startup called Instabeat, which is Hindabeka, Lebanese founder, amazing. She's so great. She has done something that slips into your swimming goggles. It gives you a LED display to show whether you're in the right heart. It measures your heart rate, measures your laps, and tells you whether you're doing well or not. And so she's on her second batch of manufacturing now already. Her initial batch was sold and developed on Indiegogo. She sold I think $60,000 worth of product. And so she started it that way. Then again, another example from Lebanon is Rody Tuner. I don't know if anyone plays guitar. They have basically a tuner that automates tuning of your guitar. So you just pluck the string and it'll automatically turn the string to the right note that you want it to be at. Same thing, they were on Kickstarter, they pre-sold the thing. They're on a significant production round, doing really well. So that's another example from the region. Then there was a startup out of Egypt called, it was One Shield, which is basically an Arduino-based hardware testing vehicle for prototyping of hardware, plugging in different things like monitor sensors and stuff like that. And they also did the same thing, Kickstarter campaign, and did it. So it's not unknown, and it has been done in the region pretty successfully.
Great. Any more questions?
No? Cool.
All right, well, actually, we have one here.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Al-Bara. I have a question. Would you invest in a startup with an existing competitor that has been in the market for one or 2 years but hasn't grown or dominated yet?
Probably, but every case will be different. So we'll have to see. We're pretty open as investors. We'll look at everything. And if we see that actually, yes, the startup is much superior, has been able to show traction in customer acquisition better than the existing, we'll probably do that deal.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Any more?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question actually, Hasan, before we leave everybody, because I'm sure there's some people who hate speaking out loud and they're going to come and grab you after we're done. There's always this race, in the region to be, the startup hub. And I know you're Bahraini, but in your opinion, what do you think, or where do you see currently has that, environment that's conducive to become that startup hub, and where do you see Bahrain fit into that?
So I don't like the whole thesis of there's going to be one startup hub in the region. It's not something I believe in. I think there'll be several startup hubs that are working on their areas of expertise and strength. I think we'll see several hubs emerge in the region, and that's sort of what's going to happen rather than a single dominant one. Where Bahrain can position itself, I think is pretty interesting. I think with the accelerators that are being launched here, with the Al-Waha Fund of Funds, with all these different projects, Bahrain can position itself as a place to get funding at the early seed stages and pre-seed stages of startups from all across the MENA region. It's a conducive environment for that. And to get more VCs and things to be here rather than other markets. I think these are probably the two areas where I see Bahrain could have a competitive advantage. It's a perfect testing ground for these startups that are at that stage, which can then expand into other markets like Saudi and Kuwait and places like that. So that's where I see Bahrain playing a role in the region.
Great. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I wanted to just thank you once again for joining us this evening. I think, what I would say that resonated with me during this talk is the whole element of making sure that when you come up to present your valuation to an investor, make sure that you don't overinflate it, because even if you convince the investor the first time round, it's going to affect you later on. It would be to educate yourself on different jurisdictions, because that will help you in further rounds of funding. It would be asking for help all the time, making sure to provide that kind of feedback to people who you want to invest in you, or at the same time, the investors that have already invested in you. And it would be to at least not waste your time just toying with an idea and talking to people about it, but actually trying to execute, and execution is what actually looks about it, and move away from convincing people that you might have a developer that's going to be working with you, but actually having a team that will actually be able to run with your idea further on. So thanks again, Hasan. And Hasan actually also mentors with some of the startups that we work with. So if you would like to, get in touch with him, please contact us, and then we can facilitate from that going forward. But I think, he's already here, and I think most of you know him. And so we just wanted to thank him, and he has become what we call the expert. So he took a risk before anybody else did, and maybe a lot of people hated him on the way, because all of a sudden he was telling people, don't do this and do this, and it was quite what would we say, like a foreign concept to a lot of us. And now looking back, maybe a lot of people would have said, oh, you know what, we should have listened to him. We would have made some money already by now. So thanks again, Hasan, and we look forward to seeing you again in future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So please, take the time. We have some refreshments outside, coffee and some light snacks, and Hasan hopefully will be sticking around for a few more minutes, and try to grab him and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.